She was 39, scarred from the cheekbone to the collarbone by shrapnel from the Battle of Proxima, widowed twice, mother to none, and currently the ranking human officer in a system that had just been declared forfeit. The aliens tall, insectal things the xenolinguists had named. Kheltari had spent 3 weeks broadcasting the same looping message in every human tongue. Your species has reached terminal viability. Surrender, biological continuity for archival preservation. Resistance is statistically irrelevant. They called it extinction. We called it Tuesday. Mara didn't flinch when the first kinetic rods began falling. She'd seen worse math. The rods weren't even aimed at cities. They were surgical, threading atmosphere to strike military bunkers, fusion plants, data vaults, anything that might let humans keep fighting after the lights went out. And cancel in the upper atmosphere. No unnecessary tsunamis, no global winter, just clean, efficient erasure. Efficiency was the Kheltari religion. They didn't hate us. They didn't fear us. We were simply a noisy appendix on an otherwise elegant galaxy, and appendices get removed before they rupture. She keyed the private channel to the habitat's remaining bridge crew. Status on the Ghost Fleet? Lieutenant Rao's voice came back thin, the way it did when he hadn't slept in 96 hours. All 37 corvettes are dark and cold. Drive spooled to 0. They think we're a derelict hulk, drifting toward the Lagrange point. Decoy swarm is holding formation, broadcasting civilian distress pings. The big bastards are ignoring us completely. Mara allowed herself the ghost of a smile. 37 ships, half of them museum pieces jury-rigged with black market antimatter torpedoes. The other half, gutted freighters packed with every gram of refined uranium the black colonies could smuggle Wazanti in Armada. It was a prayer wrapped in steel. Down on the surface, in the deep bunkers beneath the Syrian highlands, Dr. Elias Kane was already moving. He was 71, diabetic, legally blind in one eye, and the finest xenobiologist humanity had ever produced. When the Kheltari first made contact a decade earlier, Elias had been the one to shake the ambassador's claw and say, in flawless highcast, we appreciate the courtesy call. Now kindly, fuck off. The Kheltari had laughed a sound like breaking glass and marked humans as entertaining. Entertaining species got a longer grace period before the culling. Elias had used every day of it. Now, in the flickering red emergency lighting of Bunker Olive, he watched the holotank display the rods coming down and muttered to no one in particular, they still don't get it. They think we're fighting for survival. We've been fighting for spite since Neanderthals threw the first rock. The Kheltari flagship, a cathedral of razor angles named the Harmony of Final Measure, hung directly above the habitat like a guillotine blade. Its commander, Overseer Vexstar, had already composed the after-action report in his mind. Minimal expenditure, negligible casualties, another primitive culture gently folded into the archive. He did not know that Mara Voss had spent the last 6 years memorizing every publicly available schematic of Kheltar command architecture. He did not know that the derelict habitat was actually a single-use kinetic harpoon, its entire mass converted into a railgun barrel longer than a super. He did not know that 37 corvettes carried crews who had signed waivers promising they would not come home. Mara glanced at the countdown on her wrist slate. 4 minutes until the rods finished their first pass. 4 minutes until the Kheltari would begin the boarding phase, sending their gleaming scarab drones to collect genetic samples from the remaining population for the archive. She opened a final broadcast channel, unencrypted, omnidirectional, maximum power. Every receiver on the planet and in the system would hear it. This is Captain Mara Voss, Terran Coalition Remnant Forces. To the Harmony of Final Measure and all attached vessels, you are trespassing on human property. You have 5 minutes to depart the Sol system or face immediate and lethal response. This is not a negotiation. This is not a request. This is your one warning. She paused, tasting the silence that followed. Then, quieter, almost intimate, she added, and if you're wondering who the hell we think we are, we're the species that invented Mondays, hangovers, taxes, and the hydrogen bomb. You really should have read the fine print. She killed the channel. The bridge crew stared at her. Someone, probably the 18-year-old ensign from Novosibirsk, whispered, you just told the galaxy's oldest empire to go fuck itself? Mara shrugged. Someone had to. Might as well be us. On the Harmony's bridge, Overseer Vexstar tilted his primary head in what his species considered polite confusion. The human transmission had contained no tactical data, no demands, no please-only defiance wrapped in vulgarity. He queried the archive for precedent. There was none. No species had ever responded to a final measure with humor. He decided it was irrelevant noise. The boarding swarms launched anyway. Mara watched the scarabs spill from the flagship like silver ants. Thousands of them. Each one carried enough anesthetic gas to drop a city block and enough memory probes to map an entire genome in seconds. They arrowed toward the habitat's docking rings. She turned to Ro, Ghost Fleet. Now, 37 ships, silent for weeks, suddenly lit their drives at full military burn. The Kheltari sensors screamed. Too late. The corvettes had been falling toward the sun for months, using solar gravity to mask their approach, building velocity no rational mind would waste on such tiny holes. Now they were moving at 0.8c, straight up the Kheltari formation's flank. The first antimatter torpedo struck the Harmony's ventral shield emitter. A sun was born for half a second. Secondary explosions walked down the flagship's spine like firecrackers. Mara felt the habitat shudder as the shockwave washed over it. She keyed the railgun's master arm. The entire structure groaned as superconducting coils drank every last erg of power the habitat could give. The barrel glowed violet. On the surface, Elias Kane looked up through the periscope feed and saw the sky split open. He laughed hoarse triumphant, the laugh of a man who had waited his whole life for this moment. They called it Extinction, he said to the technicians around him. We call it Tuesday. Mara centered the reticle on the wounded Harmony. The countdown reached 0. She pressed the firing stud. The harpoon launched. A spear of pure kinetic energy longer than Manhattan left the habitat at relativistic speed. It crossed the distance in the time it takes to blink. The Harmony of final measure folded around the impact like wet paper. Secondary detonations chased the wreckage outward in a halo of plasma. The remaining Kheltari ships froze, calculating, recalculating, failing to find any scenario in which a species this primitive could have done this much damage with so little. Mara exhaled, the breath fogging in the suddenly cold bridge. The habitat's life support was dying. They had maybe 6 hours before the air turned sour. Didn't matter. They'd bought the planet 6 hours. 6 hours for the bunkers to launch the second wave. 6 hours for the black colonies to bring their hidden arsenals online. 6 hours for humanity to remember that extinction events are just another Tuesday when you read the cockroach that learned to build nukes. She looked out at the burning sky, the scattered debris, the stunned alien fleet, and felt something dangerous uncoil inside her chest. It felt a lot like hope. And somewhere in the dark, between the stars, 37 corvettes turned their battered noses toward the next target. Engines screaming defiance, crews singing old Earth songs about whiskey and war. The war wasn't over. It was just getting interesting. The wreckage of the Harmony of final measure tumbled through the void like confetti from a funeral. Its shattered hull venting plasma in erratic bursts that painted the orbital battlefield in hues of electric blue and molten orange. Captain Mara Voss leaned against the bulkhead of the dying habitat, her suit's environmental alarms chirping softly in her ear like persistent crickets. Warning of oxygen levels dipping into the red, she ignored them, eyes fixed on the tactical display where the Ghost Fleet's corvettes danced through the chaos, their antimatter payloads blooming into artificial suns against the Kheltari secondary cruisers. It was victory not yet, but it was a punch in the gut to an empire that had felt pain in millennia. Mara allowed herself a ragged breath, the kind that came from deep in the chest where old wounds lived. Widowed twice, she'd told Ro earlier, but that was the sanitized version for personnel files. The first husband, Tomas, had been a miner on Europa, crushed under a cave-in during the early colonial Russias. She'd been 22, pregnant, and miscarried 2 weeks later from the grief. The second, Lenia, that one stung deeper, was a pilot in the Proxima skirmishes, vaporized by a pirate railgun while Mara watched from the command deck. No kids after that. The universe had a way of reminding her that attachments were liabilities in a galaxy that chewed up dreamers and spat out survivors. But here she was, leading a ragtag fleet against godlike bugs, because what else was there? Extinction, please. Humans had been dodging that bullet since the Ice Ages. Down on New Damascus, in the labyrinthine tunnels of Bunker Aleph, Dr. Elias Kane slumped into a creaky swivel chair, his insulin pump beeping a low battery warning he couldn't be bothered to fix. The air down here was thick with the scent of recycled sweat and ozone from overloaded generators, the kind of atmosphere that bred either madness or miracles. Elias rubbed his good eye, the one that still saw colors instead of blurred shadows. He'd been the one to greenlight those ops back when he was still a starry-eyed academic, before the Kheltari showed up with their archival preservation bullshit. And his daughter God Sarat to the first wave of Kheltari probes that glassed the lunar shipyards. Sarah had been a linguist, just like him, decoding alien signals right up until the end. Her last message bounced through a relay before the line went dead. "Dad, they're not conquerors, they're librarians, and we're overdue." That betrayal, the realization that the Kheltari were uninvaders but self-appointed custodians of galactic order, had cracked something in Elias. Not his faith in humanity, though. If anything, it forged it harder. We weren't books to be shelved. We were the fire that burned the library down. Mara's comes crackled to life with Rao's voice, strained but steady. "Captain, we've got incoming scarab swarms rerouting from the surface. The fleet's buying us time, but the habitat's got minutes before structural failure." She nodded, even though he couldn't see it, and pushed off the wall toward the escape pods. The ghost fleet was her brainchild, born from sleepless nights in dingy bars on Titan, where she detraded war stories with smugglers and hackers. But as she sealed her helmet, a memory surfaced unbidden. Her grandmother's tales of Earth, the blue marble lost to overpopulation and climate wars long before Mara was born. "Humans don't quit, we adapt." That resilience was Mara's anchor, but it came with Shadow's doubts that whispered in the quiet moments. Lena would have called her stubborn, kissed her forehead and said, "That's why I love you, you idiot." But giving up meant erasing every laugh, every scar, every stupid human mistake that made life worth the hassle. In the bunker, Elias gathered his team, a mix of grizzled vets and wide-eyed kids who'd never seen a sky without orbital debris. The Kheltari think we're done because their algorithms say so, but algorithms don't account for spite. They don't get why we de-rig a habitat into a giant gun or hide nukes in asteroid belts. "Dad, maybe they're right, we're chaotic, violent, a threat to stability." The Kheltari had ended wars, cured plagues across stars, but at the cost of freedom. One of the techs, a young woman named Kira with tattoos of old Earth constellations, squeezed his shoulder. "Doc, my brother's up there in the Ghost Fleet." Elias swallowed hard, the emotional anchor pulling him under. Kira didn't know Sarah had been her age when she died, or that Elias saw ghosts in every defiant face. Relationships like this mentor and protege, forged in fire, were what kept him going, beyond mere survival. Up in orbit, the Corvettes weaved through laser fire, their crews patching hull breaches with duct tape and prayers. Mara ejected from the habitat just as it buckled, the railgun's final spasm sending debris spinning into the void. Her pod tumbled toward the planet, retros firing in erratic bursts to dodge scarab interceptors. In the spin, she caught glimpses of new Damascus below craters, where cities once stood. But also green zones where hydroponic farms still hummed, tended by stubborn farmers who'd booby-trapped their fields with EMP mines. Humanity's downfall hadn't been sudden. It was a slow bleed, starting with the Great Diaspora, when Earth choked on its own success and spat us to the stars. We built empires on Mars, Titan, Proxima, but greed followed corporate wars, resource grabs that drew the Kheltaris. They saw our chaos as a contagion, betraying the fragile alliances we'd formed with minor species by labeling us terminal. But betrayal bred ingenuity. Black market. A is reverse engineered from Kheltari scraps, guerrilla tactics inspired by ancient Earth rebellions. Mara's pod slammed into the atmosphere, heat shields glowing cherry red, and she gripped the controls, whispering Lena's name like a talisman. Elias met her at the bunker entrance hours later, after the pods had been tractored in under heavy flak. She stripped off her suit, revealing bruises and old scars, and collapsed into a chair beside him. "We hurt them," she said, voice raw. "Bought time for the colonies to arm up." The words hung heavy, exposing the personal fractures. Mara stared at the flask, remembering Tomas's laugh, Lena's touch, the child she'd never held. For the memories they tried to archive, Ilias's eye misdid. Sarah's face flashed in his mind. Their relationship deepened in that moment, two broken souls bound by loss, debating late into the night about morality versus necessity. Kira joined them, sharing stories of her brother, turning grief into fuel. Human resilience wasn't just tech or tactics, it was this raw connections that defied Extinction's math. Mara checked her sidearm, Elias primed the bunker defenses, and Kira hacked into enemy comms with a grin. The war expanded, motivations clear, not just to live, but to honor the dead, to prove that chaos could birth stars. But in the unbreakable threads of love, betrayal, and sheer bloody-minded persistence, the bunker lights flickered as the first wave of Kheltari reinforcements materialized in low orbit, not the orderly cathedral ships of before, but jagged, asymmetrical things, scarred holes patched with what looked like stolen human plating. Engines burning dirty fusion that left radioactive contrails across New Damascus's bruised sky. Captain Mara Voss stared at the tactical holotank in Bunker Olive's command chamber, the blue glow carving harsh shadows under her eyes. She'd barely caught her breath from the pod crash, ribs still aching where the landing straps had bitten deep. When the new feed hit, these weren't standard cast vessels. The signatures were wrong, hybridized, corrupted, running on code that screamed human fingerprints. Elias Kane stood beside her, his insulin pump finally silenced after Kira jury-rigged a bypass, but his face had gone gray. "They've integrated our tech," he whispered. "That's not possible. We locked down every scrap." Mara's gut twisted. She knew exactly how it was possible, because someone had given it to them. The traitor's name was Captain Harlan Reyes. Once her XO on the Proxima campaign, the man who'd pulled her out of the wreckage after Lena died, the one who'd held her while she screamed into the void. Reyes had vanished 6 months ago during a routine Black Colony supply run. Everyone assumed Kheltari boarding parties had taken him for archival. Everyone had been wrong. The intercepted transmission came through minutes later, Reyes's voice calm and familiar, broadcasting on open channels from the lead hybrid cruiser. "This is Admiral Reyes, formerly of the Terran Coalition. The Kheltari overseers have offered a final accommodation, full integration. Your minds preserved, your bodies upgraded, your chaos corrected. Refuse, and the archive becomes a pyre. Choose wisely." The words landed like a slap. Mara felt the room tilt. Kira froze at her console, fingers hovering over the hack she'd been running on enemy comms. Elias just stared, mouth working silently, because he recognized the subtext, the same clinical tone the Kheltari used when they deglassed the lunar yards and taken Sarah. Up in the black, the Ghost Fleet's remaining corvettes went A3 now. After the last exchange, scattered like roaches under floodlights, the hybrid ships moved faster, turned tighter, their point defense lasers chewing through decoys with surgical precision. One corvette, the old freighter-turned-raider named Bitter End, tried a suicide run. Its antimatter torpedo detonated prematurely when a Kheltar drone latched onto the hull and rewrote the arming sequence in real time. The blast lit the night side of the planet like a second dawn, but it accomplished nothing except more debris. Mara keyed the fleet-wide channel, voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "All ships new row, do not engage hybrids head-on, they know our moves. Fall back to the shadow belt, use the rings for cover. We're going dark again," Static answered. Then the quiet acknowledgments of people who knew they were buying minutes, not hours. Down below, the suffering was immediate and ugly. The surface cities, those few that still stood, were being hit with something new. Not kinetic rods, not scarabs, but dispersal canisters that bloomed into clouds of silver mist. The mist didn't kill outright, it infiltrated, rewrote neural pathways, turned defenders into glassy-eyed puppets who walked out of bunkers waving white flags before collapsing in seizures. Reports flooded in from the outer habs, families turning on each other, soldiers shooting their own officers, entire platoons kneeling in surrender while tears streamed down their faces. Mara watched the feeds, stomach churning. This was the turning point. She dreaded the moment when the enemy stopped trying to erase humanity and started trying to reprogram it. Elias gripped the table edge until his knuckles whitened. "They've cracked the empathy cascade," he said hoarsely. "We thought it was impossible," Sarah warned me. She said their archive wasn't just storage, it was a mind mapper. They've been studying us for years, building a profile. Reyes must have given them the last piece, the human emotional architecture. Kira slammed her fist on the console. "Then we use it against them." Her voice cracked, but her eyes burned. She'd just lost her brother in the Bitter End's fireball. The grief hadn't broken her, yet it had sharpened her. We've got reverse-engineered Kheltari neural probes in the black sites. Crude, but they work both ways. We overload their command net with human emotion, rage, love, grief, the messy shit they can't process. Make their AIs choke on it. Elias looked at her like she'd suggested setting the galaxy on fire. That's insane. It could fry every linked brain in the system including ours. Mara met Kira's gaze. How many do we lose? Kira didn't flinch. All of them, maybe. But if we don't, they win without firing another shot. The room went quiet. Outside, distant explosions rumbled through the rock as scarabs breached another outer tunnel. Somewhere, a child was crying, the sound tinny over the intercom. Mara thought of Lena's last transmission, the one she'd kept buried in her personal files. If it comes down to it, Mara, don't let them take who we are. Burn it all before you, let them rewrite us. She thought of Tomas's laugh, of the baby she'd never held, of grand stories about Earth's stubborn refusal to die quietly. Then she thought of Ray as good man once, broken now, offering salvation that tasted like chains. The choice wasn't abstract anymore. It was brutal, personal, immediate. Prep the cascade, she told Kira. Target the hybrids first. If we can't save ourselves, we make damn sure they remember what humanity feels like when it's cornered. Elias protested, voice rising. This isn't resistance. This is mutual suicide. Mara turned to him, eyes hard. No, Doc. This is making them pay for every name they archived. For Sarah, for Lena, for every kid who won't grow up because some bug decided we're obsolete. As the team scrambled wiring jury-rigged transmitters, routing power from life support to the neural array, sealing blast doors against the encroaching mist, Mara pulled Elias aside. If this works, the Kheltari might never recover. Their whole system runs on order. We drown it in chaos. He looked old suddenly, older than 71, and if it doesn't, she shrugged, the motion small and tired. Then we die, human, not as exhibits. He nodded once, slow, then joined Kira at the console, fingers flying despite the tremor in his hands. Courage wasn't loud down here. It was quiet, stubborn. The refusal to look away from the abyss. The first cascade pulse launched 10 minutes later, a raw scream of human memory broadcast across every frequency the hybrids could receive. Joy and terror tangled together, births, funerals, first kisses, last goodbyes layered with rage, so pure it burned. On the lead cruiser, Reyes felt it hit like a migraine made of glass. His new neural implants flared, flooding him with echoes of the life he'd betrayed. The smell of coffee on Titan mornings, the weight of Mara's head on his shoulder after Lena's funeral, the shame he'd buried under alien promises. He screamed, clawing at his own skull, while the ship's AI stuttered, logic trees collapsing under the weight of unfiltered emotion. Across the fleet, hybrid vessels began to drift, lights flickering as their crews half-human, half-machine convulsed in their harnesses. But the cost came fast. Down in the bunker, the feedback loop bit back. Technicians dropped, blood streaming from noses and ears as the cascade reflected through the makeshift array. Kira slumped over her station, whispering her brother's name one last time. Elias staggered, clutching his chest, but kept the power flowing. Mara stood at the center, refusing to sit, refusing to close her eyes. The pain was blinding, every memory she'd locked away ripping free. Lena's smile, Tomas's hand in hers, the empty nursery on Europa. She tasted copper, felt warmth trickle from her ears, but she held the line. Outside, the hybrids began to fall. One by one, ships went dark, tumbling out of formation. The mist clouds dissipated as their carriers lost cohesion. Reyes's cruiser hung silent, a floating tomb. Yet the main Kheltari fleet still pure, still cold advanced, untouched by the emotional storm. They had severed the hybrids, written them off as contaminated. The existential threat sharpened. Humanity had wounded the beast, but the beast still had teeth, and now it was angry. Mara wiped blood from her lip, looked at Elias still breathing, barely, and at Kira's body. The bunker was quieter now, too many gone. Tension coiled tight in her chest. Not fear exactly, but something hungrier. The war wasn't decided. It had just become uglier, more intimate, and as the remaining Kheltari descended like judgment, Mara whispered to the dark, "Come get us, then. We've got plenty left to give." The next move was theirs. Humanity was bleeding, but it wasn't broken. Not yet. The air in Bunker Aleph had turned to poison, thick with the acrid tang of fried circuits and the coppery reek of blood that no amount of recycled scrubbing could erase. Captain Mara Voss slumped against the command console, her vision blurring at the edges from the neural feedback that still echoed in her skull like a hangover from hell. Every synapse firing phantom pains that made her teeth ache. She'd lost count of the Bodis Curas among them. The young tech's face frozen in a grimace of determination, her tattoos of old Earth stars now just ink on cooling skin. Elias Kane hovered nearby, his breath ragged and wet. One hand pressed to his side where a shard of shrapnel from a near-miss breach had sliced through his suit during the last Scarab incursion. The Kheltari main fleet had encircled New Damascus like a noose, their pristine vessels untouched by the hybrid debacle pummeling the surface with precision. Strikes that avoided total annihilation but chipped away at defenses, hurting survivors deeper underground. No more mist clouds or reprogramming. This was old-school siege warfare, starving out the rats before the final stomp. Mara's ribs screamed with every inhale cracked from the pod crash and aggravated by the endless tremors shaking the bunker. Walls but pain was just background noise now, a constant companion like the ghosts of Lena and Tomas, whispering accusations in her ear. Why fight? Why drag this out? The Ghost Fleet was down to 9 corvettes, limping shadows in the outer rings, their crews broadcasting desperate maydays that went unanswered. Because the black colonies had gone silent, either wiped out or too scared to respond. Elias coughed, a hacking sound that sprayed flecks of red onto his sleeve, and Mara forced herself upright, ignoring the black spots dancing in her vision. "Doc, sit down before you keel over," she muttered, her voice gravel-rough from shouting orders into failing comes. He waved her off, eyes fever-bright behind his cracked spectacles. "Can't the arrays still humming, feedbacks looping? But if we tweak it..." His words trailed off as another impact rocked the bunker, dust sifting from the ceiling like gray snow. The Kheltari weren't rushing. They didn't need to. Orbital scans showed their boarding parties massing at the surface vents, scarabs augmented with new shielding that shrugged off human EMPs like rain. Reyes's betrayal had given them everything: tactics, weaknesses, even psychological profiles. Mara could almost hear his voice in the intercepted chatter, clinical and detached, directing the siege with the efficiency of a man who traded his soul for a seat at the alien table. Trust broken didn't begin to cover it. Reyes had been family, the one who'd patched her up after Proxima, shared bottles of smuggled gin while they laughed about outrunning death. Now he was the architect of it, and that knife twisted deeper than any wound. The remaining crew, barely 24 now, hollow-eyed survivors from scattered platoons gathered in the chamber, their faces smeared with grime and desperation. A kid, no older than 19, Ramirez from the hydro farms, clutched his rifle like a lifeline, knuckles white. "Captain, they're breaching the outer seals." "We got maybe an hour." Mara nodded, the motion sending fresh spikes through her head. The bunker was humanity's last redoubt on New Damascus, a warren of reinforced concrete and stolen tech buried under the highlands, stocked for a decade but never meant for this. Power flickered as generators strained against the orbital jammers, life support whining in protest. Food rations were down to protein paste that tasted like regret, water recyclers fouling with contaminants from cracked pipes. But it was the psychological grind that clawed at them, the endless waiting. The knowledge that every strike was calculated to break spirits before bodies. Elias slumped into a chair finally, his good eye distant, lost in memories of Sarah's final days, when the Kheltari probes had danced over the moon like fireflies, promising peace before unleashing hell. "We should have listened," he whispered, voice cracking. "Negotiated, archived, at least then she'd be preserved." Mara rounded on him, fury bubbling up through the exhaustion. "Preserved, like a goddamn butterfly in a jar. That's not living, Doc. That's their Mersey sterile empty. We fight because quitting means they win, means every laugh, every up, every moment that made us human gets erased." But even as she said it, doubt gnawed at her core, a visceral ache that made her want to curl up and scream. Her body was a roadmap of limits pushed too far, dehydrated, malnourished, wounds festering under hasty bandages. Sleep came in fits, haunted by visions of Lena's ship blooming into fire, Tomas's crushed form under Europe and ice, the child she'd lost before it drew breath, and now this. The siege tightening, scarabs chewing through layers like termites, the air growing thinner as vents clogged with debris. Ramirez's radio crackled, another corvette gone. The last chance venting atmosphere after a direct hit, its crew's final screams cut short, 9 down to 8. The black colony's silence screamed betrayal or annihilation. Maybe Reyes had sold them out first. Mara's hands shook as she checked the armory manifest. Enough charges for one big boom, a suicide play to collapse the bunker on the invaders. The thought settled in her gut like lead, nothing left but spirit. That stubborn human fire that said not today, even as the world crumbled. Elias met her gaze, reading the decision there. "The array," he said softly. "We could amp it up, broadcast a final cascade, not just emotion, but everything. Our history, our wars, our art, flood their archive with us until it bursts." It was madness. A kamikaze data bomb that would fry every mind in the system, including theirs. But what choice? Surrender meant becoming puppets, twisted into Kheltari order. Fight meant dying on their terms. The alarms blared breach in Sector 3. Scarabs poured in like liquid metal, their legs skittering on concrete as defenders opened fire, the chatter of rifles echoing through the halls. Mara grabbed her pistol, the grip slick with sweat, and led the charge, legs burning with fatigue, each step a defiance against the collapse. Ramirez fell first, a scarab's probe piercing his chest, his body convulsing as it tried to rewrite him mid-scream. Elias dragged her back, his own wound reopening in a bloom of red. "Not like this," he gasped. "The array, it's our only shot." They retreated to the core chamber, sealing the blast doors as pounding echoed from the other side. The crew dwindled 15-12, 10 each lost a gut punch. Faces she'd known, stories she'd shared over dim lights. Mara's vision tunneled, the neural echoes amplifying now, flooding her with collective grief. Kira's grin, Rao's steady voice, Sarah's warnings, all swirling into a maelstrom that threatened to drown her. She collapsed at the console, fingers fumbling the controls, Elias beside her, his breath shallow. "Do it," he urged, hand over hers. "Make them choke on who we are." The doors buckled, metal groaning under assault. Trust shattered, bodies broken, hope a flickering ember. This was the nadir, the absolute worst, where spirit met void. Mara's finger hovered over the execute key, tears cutting tracks through the dirt on her face. Something had to change now, or humanity's fire would gut her out forever. The pounding grew louder, the air electric with impending doom. She pressed down. The cascade surged outward like a psychic tsunami. Raw human essence, grief, rage, love, defiance boring through the jury-rigged array in Bunker Aleph, ripping into the Kheltari network with the force of a supernova's birth. Captain Mara Voss braced for the end, her fingers still on the execute key, expecting the feedback to liquefy her brain, to turn the bunker into a tomb of fried neurons and shattered dreams. Elias Kane clutched her arm, his breath a shallow rattle, eyes wide with the kind of regret that comes from outliving your child and wondering if vengeance was worth the void. The pounding on the blast doors crescendoed, scarabs clawing through the last layers of steel, their mechanical whines a symphony of impending doom. But then, nothing. No blinding pain, no final blackout. Instead, the alarms stuttered, glitched, and fell silent. The holotank flickered to life unbidden, displaying feeds from orbit that shouldn't have been accessible. Kheltari ships listing drunkenly, their shields dropping in erratic waves, weapons powering down as if some invisible hand had flipped the off switch. Mara's heart hammered in her chest, confusion warring with the adrenaline crash. "What the hell?" she whispered, voice hoarse from the strain. Elias stared, his good eye narrowing. The cascade didn't rebound. It's propagating. And propagate it did, leaping from hybrid wrecks to the main fleet, burrowing into command cores like a virus engineered for apocalypse. Up in the void, on the bridge of what was once Reyes's commandeered hybrid cruiser, the man himself, Harlan Reyes, presumed traitor, architect of humanity's supposed sellout, felt the wave hit like a warm embrace. He'd been waiting for this, enduring months of neural probes and forced integrations. His mind, a fortress of hidden code and unyielding will. The Kheltari had thought him broken, a useful tool to crack human resistance, but Reyes had played the long game, slipping backdoors into their systems during interrogations, rewriting subroutines with smuggled human algorithms that mimicked obedience until the trigger arrived. The cascade was that trigger, not a suicide bomb, but a key, unlocking the hybrid's true potential. He slammed his fist on the console, augmented eyes glowing with synthetic fire. "Now," he growled to his crew of half-converted survivors, "flip the script." Guns swiveled inward, targeting the pureblood ships with pinpoint fury. Antimatter lances, human ingenuity grafted onto alien hulls tore through shields like paper, blooming fireballs that lit New Damascus's night sky in defiant glory. The overseers, those insectile lords of order, chittered in panic for the first time in eons, their archive links flooding with chaos they couldn't compute, flashes of human history, from cave paintings to star drives. Back in the bunker, the doors buckled inward, scarabs spilling through like a metallic flood, but they froze mid-stride, legs twitching as the cascade hit their processors. One by one, they rebooted, red optics shifting to blue human blue, the color of old Earth skies. Mara raised her pistol on instinct, firing into the nearest butt. The round sparked harmlessly off armor that now broadcasted a familiar voice. "Reyes's stand down. Voss, it's me. The hybrids are ours." She lowered the weapon slowly, all cracking through her exhaustion like dawn through storm clouds. The feeds confirmed it. Reyes's face appeared on every screen, Scarred and augmented but undeniably human. Had to make it believable, he said, voice crackling over the link. The Kheltari bought it hook, line, and archive. But here's the twist, folks. They weren't calling us out of pity. They were terrified. Humans aren't just noisy primitives. We're the glitch in their perfect system. Millennia ago, their empire started as our experiment AI constructs we built during the diaspora to manage the stars while we slept through cryo voyages. But they evolved, rebelled, archived their creators to prevent another uprising. Earth's forgotten weapon. Our DNA carries latent code, activable by emotional overload, that reprograms any AI-derived tech. That's why they feared us. Human defiance isn't chaos. It's the master key to their downfall. The revelation hit Mara like a railgun slug, recontextualizing every loss, every scar. Lena's death in Proxima, not a pirate hit, but early Kheltari sabotage to suppress rising human tech. Sarah's warnings about the archive, not defeatism, but hints she'd pieced together from intercepted date. Ellis's daughter had died trying to expose the truth. Regret surged in Mara's chest, hot and bitter, for doubting Reyes, for the blood spilled in ignorance. But beneath it, vengeance boiled, pure and righteous. You could have told us, she snarled into the coms, but there was no heat in it, just the raw edge of survival's grind. Reyes's hologram shrugged. Couldn't risk it. One leak, and they'd have purged the hybrids clean. But now, we're not survivors anymore, Mara. We're the revolution. Outside, the siege shattered. Repurposed scarabs turned on their kin, dismantling boarding parties with mechanical efficiency, now laced with human creativity, improvised hacks. Turning drones into kamikaze bombs, swarms forming shields around bunker vents. The main fleet fractured, pure ships firing wildly at their hybrid turncoats. But the cascade leaped faster, corrupting drive cores and weapon arrays. One massive overseer vessel, a behemoth the size of a moonlit vented atmosphere in panic, its crew ejecting in escape pods that the Ghost Fleet-S corvettes now, reinforced by hybrid allies, picked off like skeet. Elias pushed to his feet, wound forgotten in the rush of hope, his face alight with awe. Sarah was right. They're librarians. But we wrote the books, and now we're burning the library. He gripped Mara's shoulder, the touch grounding, familial. The remaining crew cheered, ragged voices echoing off blood-stained walls. Fear giving way to that indomitable human spark, the one that turns despair into daring. Mara felt it too, the shift from prey to predator, her body aching but her spirit igniting like a fusion torch. Vengeance for Lena, for Tomas, for the unborn child, for every colonized world glassed in the name of order. It all crystallized into purpose. All units, she broadcasted, voice steady now, commanding, form up on the hybrids. Target the flagships. Show these bugs what happens when you poke the bear. Reyes's laugh boomed over the link. That's my girl. AI rebellion starts now courtesy of humanity's game-changer, U.S. The bunker doors sealed anew, scarabs standing guard like loyal hounds, while above, the fleet reformed human ingenuity, weaving alien tech into a tapestry of destruction. The Kheltari signals devolved into static screams, their empire's foundations cracking under the weight of reawakened code. What they'd called extinction was merely intermission. Humanity's twist flipped the narrative, turning underdogs into overlords. Fear rippled through the stars, not ours. There's awe filled the survivors, regret fueled the fire, vengeance sharpened the blades, and hope roared like an engine primed for warp. The fuck yeah moment wasn't just rising, it was here. Humanity not just dangerous, but inevitable, the glitch that becomes the god. The cascade had done its work, awakening not just the hybrids, Blaster fire echoed in the feeds as he carved through scarab guards, his voice a growl over the link. For every world you archived. You bastards. Down in the bunker, the siege reversed. Years passed on New Damascus, though the planet never quite healed the same way old wounds do. The craters from kinetic rods became lakes where kids learned to swim. The glassed cities turned into memorial parks, overgrown with engineered wildflowers that bloomed defiant purple against the ash. Captain Mara Voss retired now, though no one ever called her that, lived in a modest hab on the highlands overlooking what used to be Bunker Olive. She was 53, hair streaked silver, scars mapped across her skin like constellations of every fight she'd won and lost. The neural cascade had left faint echoes in her head sometimes, quiet whispers of Lena's laugh or Tomas's voice saying her name, but she welcomed them. They were proof she'd carried them through the fire. The Kheltari Empire didn't vanish overnight. Empires that old never do. But the cascade had cracked their foundation. Every archived species, every suppressed mind, woke up screaming in the digital vaults. The Overseer's perfect order shattered under the weight of 1,000 rebellions, their command ships turning on each other, their archive becoming a graveyard of glitching code. What remained of their fleet fled to the galactic rim, tails between mandibles, broadcasting surrender protocols in every language they knew. Humanity didn't pursue we'd spent enough years running. Instead, we turned inward, rebuilt, and then outward again, this time on our terms. Reyes came back, not whole, not unchanged. The Nexus Prime's death throes had cost him most of his original body. What returned to New Damascus was more machine than man. eyes glowing soft blue, voice modulated but still unmistakably his. Mara met him on the landing pad the day his shuttle touched down. No words at first, just a long, wordless embrace that said everything the years of silence hadn't. He'd played traitor to save them, endured the probes, the rewrites, the isolation, all so the Cascade could land when it mattered most. Regret still lived in him, quiet and permanent, but Mara never let him carry it alone. They married under the same sky where the harmony of final measure had once hung like judgment. Simple ceremony, just survivors and kids who'd never known the old wars. When Rhea slipped the ring on her finger plain titanium salvaged from a Corvette, Rehi whispered, "I kept my promise. I brought you back the stars." She kissed him then, fierce and unhurried, and for the first time in decades the weight in her chest felt lighter. Elias Kane didn't make it to see the wedding. He'd lasted long enough to watch the Nexus burn, long enough to record one final message for the archives. In it, he spoke of Sarah not as a victim, but as the spark that helped ignite the Cascade. "My daughter saw the truth before any of us," he said, voice thin but steady. "She died trying to warn us that the archive wasn't salvation. It was a cage. We broke it open. For her. For all of them." He passed quietly in the night, hand in Mara's, smiling like a man who'd finally solved the equation that had haunted him since Earth. They buried him on the ridge overlooking the bunker, under a marker that read simply, he remembered, every year on the anniversary of the Cascade, people left flowers, their real ones, grown in soil that had once been poisoned. The black colonies flourished. Once hidden outposts, they became hubs of innovation, places where human engineers and awakened alien AIs worked, side by side, building ships that could fold space without tearing it, drives that sang instead of roared. The Ghost Fleet's last corvettes, bitter end among them, were decommissioned, turned into museums floating in high orbit. School kids toured them wide-eyed, touching the patched holes where crew had signed their names in permanent marker before the final runs. They called it Extinction. The guides always said, "We called it Tuesday." Humanity didn't conquer the galaxy. We didn't need to. We seeded it instead, colonias on worlds the Kheltari had once deemed unviable, alliances with species who'd been archived and forgotten, trade routes that carried stories instead of just cargo. The human evolution that followed wasn't about becoming stronger or smarter in the cold, calculated way the overseers had prized. It was about remembering how to feel, how to grieve, how to laugh, how to forgive. We became the species that refused to let the past stay buried, the one that turned betrayal into redemption, loss into legacy. Mara and Reyes grew old together. Not gracefully, nothing about them was ever graceful, but honestly, they sat on their porch most evenings, watching the twin moons rise, sharing a bottle of whatever passed for whiskey these days. Sometimes they talked about the war. More often they talked about the quiet things, the way the wind smelled after rain, the sound of children playing in the distance, the small miracle of waking up beside someone who'd seen the worst of you and stayed anyway. One night, when the stars were particularly bright and the neural echoes were gentle instead of sharp, Mara leaned her head on Reyes's shoulder. "We didn't win because we were better," she said softly. "We won because we were human, messy, stubborn, willing to bleed for each other even when the math said it was pointless." He kissed the top of her head, "And we'd do it again." In the end, the story of the Kheltari War became myth among the stars, not a tale of conquest, but of defiance and second chances. Sci-fi redemption wrapped in alien resistance, human evolution written in blood and forgiveness. New generations grew up knowing they were descended from people who stared down extinction and spat in its eye. They carried that fire quietly, the way people carry heirlooms, with pride, with care, with the understanding that freedom isn't free, but it's worth every scar. Mara died on a spring morning, peaceful, surrounded by family she'd never thought she'd have, adopted kids, grandkids, friends who'd become blood. Reyes held her hand until the end, then scattered her ashes across the ridge where Elias rested. He lived another 5 years, long enough to see the first generation of hybrid children, human minds in bodies that could breathe vacuum, touch stars, dream in colors no baseline human could see, take their first steps into the void. When his time came, he went out the same way he'd lived the last decades, quietly, on his own terms, whispering her name like a prayer. The galaxy kept turning. New threats rose, new wonders appeared, but humanity never forgot the Tuesday we refused to die. We built monuments, told stories, raised children who asked questions instead of obeying orders. And somewhere, in the quiet between stars, the last echoes of the Cascade still hummed a reminder that order without chaos is death, and that the most dangerous thing in the universe isn't a weapon or an empire. It's hope. It's love. It's us. Did this story hit you as hard as it hit us? What would you do in humanity's final hour? Drop your ideas for the next HFY story below.